Please, sir, give our puppy something to eat. Mom is still sick, but what the human did next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor of the warehouse district. Kael, a hardened military commander from another realm, stood surveying the newly conquered sector. His armor gleamed with the polish of victory, but beneath it lay the weight of 3 weeks of relentless occupation. The city had surrendered without much resistance. The humans were weak, unprepared, and scattered. He walked through the empty streets, his footsteps echoing against the silent buildings. This conquest was supposed to feel triumphant. Instead, something gnawed at him, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. In his 17 years of leading the Vorath forces, Kael had never once questioned his mission. That changed when he heard the voice. "Please, sir. Please, I'm begging you." Kael turned to see a young girl emerging from behind an overturned cart, her silver-white hair matted and dirty. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Beside her stood another child, slightly younger, her features identical, twins, clearly. Between them stood a creature Kael recognized from his briefings. A dog. A puppy, really, impossibly small and skeletal, its ribs visible even from a distance. "We don't mean any trouble," the older girl continued, her voice trembling. "We just need food. For our puppy. Our mom, she's still sick. She hasn't left the shelter in days. We've been trying to find something, anything, but the soldiers, they—" She swallowed hard, fear evident in her wide eyes. "We heard you were in charge here. That you make the decisions." Kael said nothing. He had been trained since childhood to view the inhabitants of conquered worlds as resources, not as individuals. Emotion was a weakness he'd never had the luxury of developing. Yet something in this moment refused to follow protocol. The younger girl stepped forward, braver than her sister. "We have nothing to trade," she said. "But I know some of the old supply routes. I could show your soldiers where resources are hidden, where people hid things before you came. Please. Just something for the puppy. He's innocent. He didn't choose to be born in a conquered city." Kael looked at the small creature. Its blue eyes were dull with hunger, and its white fur was matted with dirt. It didn't even have the energy to bark or move. It simply existed in that space between hope and surrender. For the first time in his life, Commander Kael felt something shift inside his chest, something that made his carefully constructed worldview crack at the edges. "What's your mother's condition?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "A fever," the older girl said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "It came 3 days before you arrived. We don't know what it is. The medical facilities are all closed because of the occupation. We've been trying to keep her warm and give her water, but without proper medicine." Kael made a decision that would later be examined by military historians and philosophers alike. He signaled to his second-in-command, a veteran soldier named Vex who had fought at his side for a decade. "Secure the pharmaceutical sector," Kael commanded. "Medical supplies, antibiotics, anything that might treat a fever. And find food, nutritious food, for a family and a—" He paused, still unfamiliar with the concept. A puppy. Vex's expression didn't change, but Kael could see the question in his eyes. "Sir, that's an order," Kael said simply. Within 2 hours, a delegation arrived at the shelter, where the family was hiding. The girls watched in disbelief as soldiers carried in boxes of medicine, canned goods, fresh water, and even dog food, real, packaged dog food that the supplier had originally kept in reserve for the elite garrison. Kael entered the shelter himself, something no commander of his rank typically did. The interior was sparse and cold. On a makeshift bed in the corner lay the girl's mother, her skin flushed and her breathing labored. She attempted to sit up when she saw him, fear flooding her features. "Don't," Kael said, not unkindly. "Rest." He instructed the medics he'd brought to attend to her immediately. He watched as they assessed her condition, administered medication, and provided instructions to the girls on how to care for her properly. The puppy, in the meantime, devoured the food placed before it with desperate enthusiasm. The transformation was immediate and profound. The small creature's eyes began to regain their light, its movements became more animated, and for the first time, it barked. The sound was small and uncertain, but it was real. The older girl approached Kael cautiously. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do this? You don't have to help us. Your people, they don't typically—" "No," Kael agreed, looking at the puppy eating voraciously. "We typically don't." He thought of his own childhood, in the frozen compounds of his world, where emotion was considered a defect to be eliminated. He thought of the countless conquests he'd overseen with clinical detachment. He thought of the millions of lives reduced to statistics in mission reports. "I think," he said slowly, "that perhaps I have been incomplete in my understanding of what it means to lead. A commander conquers territory and populations. But perhaps there is something more valuable, something I have never possessed." He looked at the girls, at their mother beginning to stabilize, at the puppy now playing with a toy the younger girl had produced. To protect the weak. To preserve life instead of merely controlling it. Over the following weeks, the nature of the occupation changed. The girl's mother recovered fully. The puppy grew strong and healthy, becoming something of a mascot to the garrison. And Commander Kael instituted protocols that would reshape the entire occupation: medical care for civilians, food distribution, protection of vulnerable populations. His superiors on the Vorath homeworld were initially outraged. How could a military commander prioritize civilian welfare over efficiency? How could mercy possibly serve strategic interests? But Kael had learned something that no military academy could teach. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in domination, but in compassion. Years later, when historians studied the occupation of Earth, they would note it as an anomaly, the only conquest in Vorath history that resulted in lasting peace rather than resentment. They would credit it to an accident of fate, a moment when a hardened commander met two desperate children and a starving puppy. But Kael knew the truth. It wasn't chance at all. It was the moment he learned what it meant to be human, something the humans themselves had tried to teach him all along.